Hello students, today we will be doing a literary term again, and that literary term is heroic couplet. Now why I am doing literary term is that once you understand the literary terms, that is the literary devices which the poet has used in his poems. So when I am going to do the poems, it will be very easy for you to understand, and you can write in your answers that the poet has used such and such a literary term, that it is a sonnet, the poem type, it is a sonnet, it is an ode, it is an elegy, or the poet has used a simile or a metaphor or an alliteration. The poem is written in heroic couplet, it has a rhyme scheme, it is a blank verse written in blank verse, and so on. So literary terms are very important and they hold a very important place in your syllabus. Today we'll be doing the heroic couplet. Now heroic couplet is a pair of rhyming scheme. Pair means two lines of rhyming scheme that is present in a heroic poem. Heroic poem normally is a poem which is in the form of an epic, means a long poem, and it deals with the heroism present in the characters. So it is present in a heroic poem, or that relays the themes of heroism within a larger poem. So normally heroic couplet is used in a large poem, and the theme of the poem is normally heroism, bravery, courage. Now, heroic couplets generally consist of two lines, as I've already told you, a couple of lines, two lines, written in iambic pentameter. Though some poets chose to vary the meter, perhaps using the blank verse or incorporating enjambment between the first line and the second line, but normally usually it is used written in iambic pentameter. Now, heroic couplet is a couplet of rhyming iambic pentameters, often forming a distinct rhetorical as well as metrical unit. The origin of the form in English poetry is unknown, but Geoffrey Chaucer in the 14th century was the first to make extensive use of heroic couplet in his epic poems like Canterbury Tales. The heroic couplet became the principal meter used in drama in about the mid 17th century, and the form was perfected by John Dryden, who is a neoclassical poet, and Alexander Pope, again a neoclassical poet, in the late 17th and in the early 18th century. A rhyming couplet is one of the simplest example of a poetic form, a pair of lines which end with the rhymes. A heroic couplet is a form of the couplet often found within epic or narrative poetry. As I've already told you, epic means a big poem which deals with great themes, which deal with heroic themes, or a narrative poetry where the poet is actually the narrator and he is telling us about the various things of life. The difference between a couplet and a heroic couplet. Couplet means two lines. What is the difference between a normal couplet, the usual couplet, or a heroic couplet? A heroic couplet is a specific type of a couplet that discusses heroic themes and that usually uses iambic pentameter. Whereas an ordinary couplet, on the other hand, is simply two successive lines of poetry, often two lines that rhyme and that employ the same meter. Now, the Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer, I'll give you one example of the heroic couplet, or the written in iambic pentameter. She was worthy woman all her life, house bonds at church door she had 5. Then we have the Rape of the Lock, again a very great poem, and it is also called a mock epic by Alexander Pope. Hear thou, great Anna, whom 3 realms obey, does sometimes counsel take and sometimes stay. So here T is actually pronounced as te. For a couplet to be heroic, it needs a heroic setting. Obviously, when you're talking about heroism, you're talking about bravery, the setting or the background or the whole environment also should relate to what the poet wants to portray. So the heroic couplet is usually closed, meaning that both lines are end stopped. Means it is stopped by the same type of punctuation, and the lines are a self-contained grammatical unit, so they are complete in themselves. Heroic couplets often function as pithy statements because they are brief and to the point. Because the two lines of heroic couplets rhyme, they function as a means of grabbing the listener's attention and indicating the information in those lines as important. So in a heroic couplet, the couplet actually gives you a complete meaning. They rhyme together, and secondly, these lines are very important and they deal with the heroism or the bravery or the courage, and the setting is also the same. In both its original and the parodic form, the heroic couplet is an important part of Western poetry's evolution. With its driving rhythm, tight rhyme, and syntactical independence, it mirrors the subject matter it portrays. So, a heroic couplet actually tells you, it gives you an insight of what type of the subject matter or the theme the poet wants to portray. Whether they are tales of adventure, whether they are tales of war, whether they are tales of magic, whether they are stories of true love, and yes, even a stolen lock of hair, like you have in The Rape of the Lock by Alexander Pope. Because of its structure and its history and tradition, the heroic couplet is usually quite recognizable, allowing us to bring additional context to the poems we read. So, what happens is that a lot has been said by the poet in the heroic couplet, and a lot is left to the imagination. But the heroic couplet ends in such a manner that it makes your imagination tickle and run, and the reader, he tries to add on his own what the poet is saying. I hope you have understood. Thank you.